All right, thanks everyone. Hope you enjoyed lunch and looking forward to a great session of some case studies here. So I'm Anand. I'm the co-founder and president of a company called LeadGenius.com. We started about 5 years ago. For the first 4 years of the company, I ran sales myself with a very, very large network of contractors. In a previous life, I was an academic researcher studying how you can use crowds in online sales and various other techniques. A little bit of background on the company. We build software that manages outbound account-based sales for fast growth companies. Most of our customers sell to small and mid-sized businesses. So some of our customers are here in this room, and if you are, I love you. And for everyone else, here's what we're all about. We build out lists of accounts that companies should sell to. Our software figures out who inside those companies are actually interesting to sell into, and then we let people send customized prospecting mail back and forth from different sales reps into those small and mid-sized businesses. That's the business in a nutshell. Today I'm going to take you back in time a little bit to talk about some of the ways that we got into this business. We got to have an inside look at how a whole lot of companies have set up their outbound sales processes, all the way from really, really small operations where it's just one salesperson in a room cold calling, all the way up to these giant powerhouses that are prospecting into thousands of businesses at once. And we actually eat our own dog food. So some of the techniques I'll talk about are stuff that we have used ourselves and we still use ourselves in the office today. And my apologies for the screen thing on top. I'll just read up that line that's going to be blocked for the rest of this talk. Okay, great. So today's story. Back in 2013, when we were getting into the business we're in today, one of our customers approached us with a very unusual request, which was that they thought their target market was actually just about every small and mid-sized business in the country. So if you're in marketing, you know that the rational response to this kind of request is that you need to think a little harder about who your customer is. But they were pretty hell-bent on it, and back then we were a little more open-minded about it. So we said, well, okay, let's give it a shot and see how far we can get down this path. So this is the story of how we did it. So what I'm going to share with you today, the strategies that we used to actually help this customer identify and pitch just about every small and mid-sized business in America. You'll see that they didn't actually reach all of them. We were able to talk some sense into them. But I'm also going to show you how you can try these tricks at home inside your own organization, right? So I'm not advocating that you should go and do what we did here at this kind of scale, but I am advocating that the techniques that we're using here can be used to pitch a subset of the markets that you're interested in going after when we're talking about going after small and mid-sized businesses. Okay? Great. So first up, why should someone think that they should try and pitch everybody in the country? Well, the short answer is that it's these things, hockey sticks. People want really, really, really fast growth when they're sitting on a bunch of venture funding. That was the case for this customer. And if time is more important than money, you may make a few compromises. But I think a better way to think about it is through this quote. And this is a quote from a relatively well-known startup founder. I don't know if anyone knows it. Once you found product market fit, the only real acceptable limits on your sales growth are how fast you can hire salespeople and how fast you can fill that funnel with leads for those salespeople. Anyone know who this was? No, but you're close. It was Parker Conrad at Zenefits, which was, until recently, the fastest growing SaaS company of all time. So this is the kind of philosophy that sort of, in spite of everything else, people who are really oriented around fast growth sometimes think about. And it makes sense in a lot of ways, right? If you have salespeople, you want to keep them busy as often as you can. Okay, so the way this traditionally works looks something like this, right? We all go out. If we're marketing, we buy a giant list of names, emails, phone numbers. We might go to Dun & Bradstreet or data.com. We buy a whole bunch of ads that we target against them. Sales hires a bunch of staff and staffs up, and then we try and match up one group with the other, right? So sales works their way down our list of leads, inbound and outbound, and in-person visits. But this is a good way to spend budget without always getting good results. And many of us in this room have experienced this, right? You spend a lot of money on list buys and ads. You hire a lot of sales reps. Reps are expensive, and most of the time they're talking to people who are not interested, right? They're calling these folks up, saying, hey, let's talk. They say, no, let's not talk. It's a lot of wasted budget. So the strategy we employed here was to try and figure out an outbound SMB model that would try and pre-identify people who would be interested before we actually put them on the phone with sales or sent somebody into their stores to go visit them. We were going to try and actually send out messaging at scale that would be customized. So salespeople inside the organization were going to automatically be able to write a custom-tailored message to each prospect. And if somebody said via email, hey, I'm interested, they wrote back, we would point them to sales, a real salesperson, not an automated tool. Okay, so that was the idea. We were going to build an outbound SMB program that would pitch everybody in the country, or at least everyone that we could find. It would come from sales. Individual messaging would go out. And if people wrote back and said, yes, I'm interested, then we would escalate it to a real salesperson. Okay, so we talked about this with 3 steps. So first step, get a lot of data. First, we built this list of every small business in the whole country. And we did it without engineering help. I'll show you how you can do it with engineering later, but I'll show you how we did it without engineering first. We learned their pain, so we tried to figure out relevant information about each one of those potential buyers to decide if they were going to be a likely good fit or not, and maybe pre-qualify them a little, see if they actually would be worth talking to or not before we sent them a message. And then we actually came up with a technique to try and pitch these guys at scale. Send each person an individual unique message that came from an actual salesperson. Okay, so first question. We'll go through each one of these pieces in turn. Building the list. Anyone remember from this morning how many businesses are there in the US? Small. Yeah, so we have a range that was quoted here. Back when we did this, according to the US Census, there were 27,908,000 businesses in the US. Now, the reason these numbers vary, depending on who you ask, is that not all of these businesses are actually meaningful operations. Some of these are just one person who has maybe decided to incorporate or file an LLC, or maybe they're a sole proprietor. They may not even be doing much in the way of revenue. They may not have sales. They may not buy anything. 6 million of those or so are what I would call interesting businesses in that they have a payroll operation, right? Which means they're employing at least one person, maybe part-time. But that's enough to say that they probably have some form of revenue coming in. They're probably making purchases, and they're able to support various kinds of interactions with a salesperson. Okay, so we're going to stick just to those businesses that when we think about who we're going to sell to. Okay, so take a second to ask yourself, if somebody came to you with this challenge, figure out every business in the US, how would you get them? So this is where we started. First place we looked was the web. Makes sense. Yelp and LinkedIn, of course, have lots of information about businesses. You can see here 2 examples of businesses. These are small. There's lots of relevant information in there. You can find out information about where the company is, what they're rated, what their name is, how many people work there, all the relevant facts that we might want to use when we're populating a database of small and mid-sized businesses. Okay, so we went to a series of websites. There are 47 million different retail establishments, physical locations in Yelp, so way more than the number of actual businesses, but not every business is in Yelp. So you can also look at Crunchbase and AngelList to find small technology companies. You can look at Manta to find lots of professionals. And then, of course, if there's companies that aren't listed in any of those places, there's one place where companies are very likely to be listed, which is in the databases by each of the 50 secretaries of states in the United States, which are public records. Okay, so we didn't go to Dun & Bradstreet. We didn't go to data.com. We did take a look at those sources in the beginning, but data quality is not really up to date enough to capture all the information that we're interested in. And if you know how those tools work, it's easy to understand why. Okay, so for each one of those websites, our goal was to put every one of those businesses into a CSV file, right? So pull them out, get them into a file, figure out who owned that business, figure out the address of that person so we could email them. And if they didn't have an email address, figure out some other way to contact them, and then verify that to make sure it was right before we push it on to the next step in this process. Okay, so we did this. It wasn't just me who did all of this. It was with a gigantic team of virtual workers. And I'll tell you exactly how gigantic in a minute. For each one of those folks, we put them through a 3-step process. Step one was to use a tool called import.io, which let them grab information out of these sites to drop it into a spreadsheet. Step two was to use Reportive to figure out what that person's contact data was. And step three was to use a tool called Twofer to verify the email address was deliverable and right. Okay, and this assumes that if you were implementing this technique, would not use developers, although we since have gone back and done this whole thing right with developers. The first time we did it just like I'm describing here. Okay, so import.io, free tool. There's paid versions too, but we use the free one to grab information. It basically takes the interesting parts of a website, a person goes and clicks through them, and it turns it into an extractable format. So someone goes through, clicks on the different parts of the site they want to pull information from, it pulls it out, drops it into a CSV. Reportive, most people have played with this tool before. You put in an email address, it looks up LinkedIn's database and tells you who that person is if it's a valid email address. It used to check other tools too, and there are other tools now that have taken its place like Clearbit, but back then this is what we used. And then Twofer, which is a tool that we use to verify email addresses. It just tells you this thing is deliverable, this thing is not deliverable, mostly right. There's a few cases where it doesn't work. Okay, so we used virtual workers to do this. The reason is pretty straightforward, and if you've hired sales staff in the Bay Area or really anywhere in the US, you might know why. Here in the Bay Area, the kind of folks who do this work, basically grabbing information, are called lead development reps or sales development reps. They're expensive, and it's super competitive to hire them. They want to become salespeople and grow up. Instead, we hired virtual staffers, and that's one of the virtual staffers we hired, Jelena, who is based in Belgrade, Serbia. Virtual staffers are relatively inexpensive compared to US staffers, and you can get a more or less unlimited or scalable supply of these folks through online marketplaces like Upwork, through systems like TaskUs, or even through LeadGenius. And generally, these folks have different profiles than folks who are looking for sales careers in the US, so research at scale like this is their specialization. So we hired a lot of these people. These are two of our teams that we ended up with, one in Manila, one in Belgrade. We hired about 100 folks total. These folks ended up working on their own schedules. They organized themselves into teams. They worked about 40 hours a week, but they got to pick their time and hours. And we broke them up. So one team was looking to start out with just information in California. Another team was looking just at companies in New York. And the reason was they could develop regional specialties and go city by city and then industry by industry across those entire states. So this took this entire problem of figuring out every business and broke it down into small, manageable territories that each group could research at scale. Okay, so it wasn't enough to just grab the information. We also had to figure out something about these companies that actually would make them likely to respond to a prospecting message. So if you're going to reach out to absolutely everybody in the country, as we told our client, don't waste the pitch by just sending the same message to everybody. First, you will be mass deleted, and second, your domain will be shut down. So we told them to personalize and personalize at scale. So we researched each one of these companies at scale so we could say something personal and meaningful to each one of them. We used two tools. One was called Datanize and one was called Built With to figure out technology that was being used by these companies. We used LinkedIn to figure out the history of the person we were talking to at that company, right? So figure out where they'd worked before. We figured out lots of pieces of information that we thought would actually be personally relevant to each of the people we were reaching out to. So some of the examples were any LinkedIn connections that were in common between our client and this prospect, coworkers that might be in common between our client and this prospect, any social media activity that they had done recently, blog posts, tweets, we mentioned those, product usage or technology usage from Built With, and then hiring patterns. If they were hiring for roles that were using our client's product or that would have used our client's product, we grabbed it, okay? And then we dropped this into an email system. And the kind of email systems we used back then, you've seen a lot of these. These are tools like Tout or Yesware or Outreach that are designed for large-scale individual prospecting by sales reps automatically. They're all great. You write a template, you import a bunch of data into these templates, and individual salespeople just hit go, and they automatically pitch all their leads with a sequence of messages. So it's relatively automatic, it's centralized, and you can use a lot of information that you find during research to pitch people. We ended up rolling our own, actually, just so we could do one thing that was useful that these tools couldn't do, which was rapidly read the responses and decide which ones were positive and which ones were negative. And for this one, we used an engineer. Okay, so here was the strategy. We were going to set up different campaigns for each state, different campaigns for each industry, send prospecting messages from reps at our client site, not marketing messages that were coming from one address, but one-to-one messages coming from people who were in charge of those territories. And we used that data that we pulled to make sure that all the information that we had was personalized to that business, to that person, and to the perceived need. So let's show some examples. Okay, so here's an example of the kind of email that we sent. Subject line was aimed at matching one of our customers' products against the person's need. It was something specific to that person. We tried to make sure that we were trying to be direct and helpful, sort of something that was actually personalized. And then we had some other techniques in there, like matching up a LinkedIn profile view on the same date. Okay, so take a guess. How much of this email did we write by hand? Yeah, none. Basically, all that information was being structured in there automatically based on what we found during the research, right? So if somebody was hiring for an HR role, we'd put that in there, right? We'd say, oh, we saw you were hiring for HR, because one of our researchers had seen that they were hiring for HR. And there were different categories of things we could mention in that opener. If there was somebody that was in common between our customer's LinkedIn and that prospect, we would mention that. We took a look through our customer CRM to figure out which customers in their industry we had already sold to, mentioned that in the email. And we did a little bit of background research also. So if there was stuff in social media or news that turned out to be relevant, we mentioned some of that. So we were able to send out pretty large scale, relatively personalized messages. So how did all of this work? So we ran this. We didn't actually pitch every single person in the country. We were able to convince our customer to go after a subset of that market. This particular campaign went to a very large number of people. Our basic unit for doing this research was a 3-person team. One person was a virtual lead researcher who was just researching this data all the time. One person who was just compiling this into emails. And then one person who was just checking to make sure that this was going out correctly, right? To double check the information, double check the emails, et cetera. So each of those researchers had a LinkedIn Premium account, Google Spreadsheets, they had import.io, Reportive, 2 for verification, and then they were using Datanyzer built with. People who were actually writing those emails were using LinkedIn Premium to grab that last information and then using our email tool. Okay. So our experiences showed that you could grab about 30 leads an hour accurately for one team of 3, which means a team of 3 could do 1,200 leads a week and send out 1,200 pitches a week. So 33 teams could produce about 26,400 leads and emails a week. Okay, so working full-time for a year, these guys could pitch about 1.5 million leads a year. We did this for 2 years. Okay, so we collected 3 million companies over 24 months. We did not pitch all of them. We convinced our customer to restrict it to people who there was an actual identified need based on the research. This was still a lot of research, about 120,000 person hours of research that we spun up. So ridiculous scale. And actually, if you didn't get one of these emails, probably somebody at your company or someone at a company you know got an email that came from our client, but started with research from us. Some of these campaigns were more effective than others. So this wasn't all sent sort of one day hit go. Some of these campaigns worked extraordinarily well. Some of these campaigns worked extraordinarily badly. This kind of variation is exactly what you'd expect if you're sending out messages with a minimum of trying to match your customer profile to the actual message type. As our customer got better at doing this, they got really good results. The highest they ever posted was 30% positive replies, which was amazing. The lowest was 0.01 when they were clueless and just getting started. Okay, but the overall outcome worked really well. The customer picked up 2,000 new clients in the first 12 months of prospecting, which, looking at what they spent, was pretty much a success from their perspective. Okay, and this is what it looked like in one of our customers' inboxes. Lots of replies when they hit go. So of course, this led to the related question, which is how do you throttle these to make sure that your salespeople don't just drown when they're doing this kind of automated prospecting? And eventually it did this. Another thing to note was that, and this is an interesting observation, a lot of the positive replies that we got weren't coming off of the first emails that were sent. They were coming off of second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth emails. You would get unsubscribes, obviously, but for people who didn't unsubscribe, a lot of them would keep opening and keep engaging on the content, which we didn't expect. We really thought that if people weren't interested, they would delete and ignore. And some people did. It's more common for people to actually just say, if I'm not interested, don't contact me again. Okay, so sum it up. Would we brute force collect this information again? For us, no. The reason is that we did it once and we already have the database. Of course, that information is changing all the time, so information we collected 2 years ago is not the same. But by now, there's lots of tools out there to go grab this information. It's not just us who sits on this information. A lot of people have built out systems that are out there to crawl the web, grab information, pull it into a CRM. So if I were to do this again today, I would start with one of those tools as opposed to going to us. But if you're going to a subset of the market, if you're trying to figure out how to get everybody in a particular market segment, not everybody in the whole country, but let's say you want every technology company in California founded in the last 5 years, right? You can do things like this that don't scale. You can go and grab a virtual network of researchers, give them the tools in that tool chain, pull that information out and drop it into your CRM. If you give them the right technology, there are great ways to make this work and figure out how to arm your sales teams with the best leads. And sales under this model was using the kind of techniques that marketing is traditionally used, which is how do you personalize messages at scale? How do you do lots of research about your buyer's persona and identity? And this was an interesting takeaway for us to figure out that sales teams who were going after small and mid-sized businesses could try and use these kind of targeted and customized data collection techniques to great effect. Okay, great. So that's it. I love to talk about this stuff. We've seen this stuff work. We've seen where it can't work. We've seen where it breaks too. So tell me what works for you. I'm always happy to share strategies about going after this market. That's it.
Q&A?
Yeah, we can do some Q&A.